Hey there, and welcome back to the Complicated Kids podcast. I'm your host, Gabrielle Nicolay. I am a toddler whisperer, a speech therapist, and a parent coach. And today I'm really delighted to be joined by Amanda Diekman. Amanda, welcome.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
It's really fun to have you because you have written what I think is a really important book. So before we talk about that, could you introduce yourself a little bit and tell the good people who you are?
Yes, I am a mom of three. I live in North Carolina in an intentional community that supports and celebrates people with disabilities. I am also a PTSD survivor and healer, and so a big part of what I feel here to talk about is what it looks like to let go of expectations that are not aligned for our kids and ourselves so that we can move as a family into a shame free space of freedom where we get to decide what our lives look like. And that is really what low demand is all about for us as a family, is about being who we are in intimate connection with the people we love most and finding that ease and joy that comes when we let go of things that are not for us and really embrace who we truly are. A couple other layers about me. I am a trained Presbyterian pastor and have a whole background of serving religious communities, although I'm not doing that right now. And I'm also a late diagnosed autistic adult and a PDAer, which is a profile of autism that is not as well known in the United States, but a really important piece of how autistic folks are showing up and often getting missed by our diagnostic system. So we could talk about that as well if you like.
Yes, we will definitely be talking about that. And let's just define our terms. PDA
Hmm.
in England, pathological demand avoidant or
Hmm.
avoidance. Do you ascribe to the pervasive drive for autonomy version of events?
I always ascribe to what people want to use to define themselves.
Okay.
And I guess to say that for myself, I don't really care. I'm actually not, I mean, I'm a writer, but I'm not a wordsmith. I'm so much more about people's energy and their intention and the like unfolding relationship. Like you can use whatever words you want, but if I find that I'm in relationship with you and you're not safe for me,
Mm.
no word is gonna heal that breach. So I'm kind of like, eh, like,
I I really feel that from you. That's so interesting. I just, as you were talking, I got this whole way open chest feeling because you're
mm,
right. It is all human relationship is is about this interplay of energies, and it's so funny when we're going kind of around the bend, and we'll come back in a second and kind of start at the beginning again. But particularly, this is for me as a mostly neurotypical person. When I am interacting with folks who are neurodivergent, it is so much more about my energy, particularly with kids, because then there's also a power dynamic there, right? Because I'm an
yes.
adult and large and they are small. um, if my energy's off, I can say all the pretty words that I want and not get anywhere. And when my energy is aligned with what I am doing and saying, then we enter into this beautiful, I sometimes call it a yellow bubble, this beautiful yellow
Mm,
bubble in which we're a give and take. And I can get very
mm,
emotional actually thinking about it because
yeah.
that's where we want to live.
Yeah, I always say that's where the magic happens. Like people want magical pixie dust that's going to make things better. And I'm like, there is no pixie dust except trusting connection, which is your yellow bubble. That that's our magic. Like if we embrace the mystery and wonder of being human, we were given, each of us given magic. And it's deep alignment. And what's so cool, and again, I love that we're kind of starting here and we'll come back around to the more practical stuff. But I love that science, like cutting edge science right now, is like defining all this for us. Like we know this, right? Like if you're a human and you've ever felt deeply trusted and seen where you can be your whole self and the other person is not going to turn away or reject you, that is so magical. And now scientists are like, yeah, they're, our neurons are mirroring each other, and there's this like electromagnetic field in between us where we're literally co-creating a new reality and like blah, blah, blah science. But it's it's like, well, we know that. And it's also great to know that this is where the best scientists in the world in terms of human development are like putting their energy.
I think
And that
that's
really
right.
is core to low demand. So it's a perfect place to be in our conversation today.
It's so interesting because at the same time that this is happening, and yes, right, like so all of these ancient traditions of meditation, of loving kindness, of like all of these things turns out actually have, they create physical reality in which
Hmm.
neurons change and molecules change and do other things than what they usually do. And we are so conditioned by whatever, I don't know, the internet probably and other people, to hide that, to mask it.
Mm.
And, even for people who fall more sort of neuronormative, whatever that even means. So that's a whole other conversation. Um, all of us are masking something most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder, you said, for anyone who's ever felt that deep connection, like how how many of us, what percentage of us are actually feeling that on a sustained basis? I wonder sometimes.
Mm.
Because of so many distractions, because of so much posturing, because we have to achieve and get and buy and do. um where are we just kind of being with ourselves and someone else in really deep connected beingness?
Mm.
So
Yeah, being instead of doing. Well, we'll talk more about what it took for me to move out of heavy masking, or we can, I guess. I'm
yes,
inviting
please,
you.
let's do that.
We can
Yes.
talk more about heavy masking to more authentic living, and I can speak too, and I'll just voice it now that I can't say what it's like for a more neurotypical person. I've only experienced it through my own autistic lens, but it's also really painful. There's such a grief journey, so much unlearning that is not easy. And this is what I do with parents and families all day. I mean, what I do all day is take care of my kids, but professionally, what I love to do is take people down this journey of like, let's really look at who you actually are, and what would it look like if you created more of a life that reflects that, that centers that. How can we drop the shame that you've taken on over all these years? Because the demands are just the very, very surface level of the deep work. So the demands are like, make sure your house is tidy when people come over because you're a woman and that's a reflection on your identity, or make sure your kid is well behaved in church because you're a man and you're supposed to be the disciplinarian, or make sure you're going to school every day because you're a kid and that's what kids do to show that they're good kids. Those are the demands. But the like deep stuff is, what does it mean to be a person and a good person nonetheless? And who really are you? And what do you need in order to thrive? And that whole journey is so beautiful at moments and also so difficult.
And people come to this. So let's circle around to the book. So you wrote this book, Low Demand Parenting, which
Yeah.
is kind of a primer. It's kind of a part memoir, part primer for families who are experiencing something similar to what you did. Can you sort of walk us through the generalities of what happened in your family and then what you did about it? Because I think you really did take the plunge into, I mean, and when I was reading the book, I was like, wow, um, this is someone who figured out that what they were doing was not working. And instead of continuing to do that, you were like, no, 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 no. Let's change all of this.
I I write, and I think it's in the beginning, maybe in the dedication, that it's really a love story between me and my kids, because I so feel like each one of them is my wake up call. It's my invitation into more fullness, and that there was with each kid kind of a turning point of like, am I gonna, like you say, sort of soldier on even though I know it's not working, or am I gonna see you and let you change me?
See
So
you,
the
capital S, right?
yes,
That's how I think
yes.
of it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Sorry,
I
go
like
ahead.
that. Love it. So I was undiagnosed autistic for 35 years, and had, there's so much there, but let's just say countless examples of masking, of feeling different and weird and being afraid of that feeling. And so then hiding it in every way possible, being misunderstood, and also being praised for the masking. Like people loved masked Amanda. And so all of that intensified until perfectionism and performance was like my MO in the world. And people who knew me well knew that there was this deep well of authenticity behind it. But because the mask was so very present and prevalent, it was really hard. I never felt like anyone really knew me, and other people didn't really feel like they knew me because I was so driven to do everything right. It was like my ultimate protection. And so when I arrived at parenting, like that only intensified because now I had these little beings outside my body who were like, are you going to be the perfect mom? People are looking at the way you address your kid and evaluating you as a human. I think that this is a part of parenting that's not talked about enough, and needs to change. It's just it's so casual. People will be like, oh, he's such a good kid, or he's such a great grown up. I can tell he had great parents. And it's like, you know what? No, that is such a lie. My kids can show up and look terrible, and I'm still a great parent. Like, these are not the same. And also, they have the freedom to be terrible without it reflecting on me. Like, let's just let this be a terrible moment for them. That whole thing is like, blah,
Well,
death.
this is a really interesting, and I just want to pause here for a second because there's this, and the word that I have seen, and Sarah Ockwell Smith, who wrote the Gentle Parenting book, calls it childism,
Mm,
which again, like whether or not you agree with her sort of brand of whatever this is a different question. But like, I do think most people think that children are extensions of their adults
mm.
and therefore are empty vessels into which we must pour all of our goodness and none of our flaws.
Yes.
And so when we see that reflected back at us, we see the things we dislike or disown about our own selves reflected in our children. We're like, we got to get rid of this now. We must stamp this out. And it's very, it's kind of an existential threat if one is
Mhm.
going to continue to mask and continue to ignore those unowned parts of ourselves.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. Yes. And which is why parenting is such deep work. And parenting neurodivergent kids as an unknown neurodivergent yourself, which is such a common experience because neurodivergence is at least 80% hereditary. And most of us walking around, children of the 80s and 90s and even early 2000s, if we were diagnosed young, it was a traumatic experience because the expectations and assumptions of being autistic or ADHD in those days, especially as a girl, were just awful. So it's almost, anyway, that's a sidebar. So low demand came about. We're in a high demand, Amanda, high demand culture. Everything is very reinforced. And then my kids weren't meeting any of the traditional milestones. They were experiencing each one of them in very different ways. It's like each kid, I was having to relearn what it looks like to be a parent all over again because they're so different from each other. But each one, big, big, big struggles, pushing me far beyond my capacity. And then my 6 year old, my middle kid, when he turned 6, went into autistic burnout. And just for some context, I didn't know he was autistic and I'd never heard of autistic burnout. So it just looked like a catastrophic failure. Like he went from more or less functioning typical 5 or 6 year old kid to not able to speak to me, growling for communication, eating 2 foods, watching YouTube 10 hours a day, knocking holes in the walls, unable to get in the car without scratching my face, talking about self-harm and death all the time. Like it was so dramatic. And for us overnight, although burnout can often be more of a slow growing experience where there's not a tipping point. And I was faced with this question, like, is this a failure? Am I a failure? Which is the natural question based on all we just talked about. If kids are empty vessels that we pour, then I have poured something terrible into this person, and thus I am terrible
Mhm.
and have failed. Is he a failure of a kid? And that was what broke my heart open because all I could say was, no, I'm going to love you right here. I trust this. I trust your inner healer is taking you on your own journey and that I I can show up and walk beside you or I can push you away by trying to change you. But those are the two choices and I'm going to walk this with you. And that for me looked like changing everything about our lives. Because I'm the PDA autist, like I see, I take dramatic steps. I'm a catalyzer. I'm passionate. I'm energy driven. So I was like, okay, new energy in our home. We are who we are. And of course, it was brutal. And the next year involved so much unlearning for me. And I did eventually need a lot of more expensive and intensive mental health support in order to do this work, which was equal parts about the big changes happening in my kids. And as you pointed to, all that it revealed about my own trauma, my upbringing,
Yeah.
and the parts of me that had been shamed since I was able to conceptualize who I was supposed to be.
Right.
And that's really the work that I love to do the most is to see families learn to name their own shame and to it's step by step, shame free sounds so simplistic. It's like, dude, every single day I
It's
am
it sounds like,
reworking this.
could I please get to the place where I decide to be shame free and then I am shame free?
Oh God.
Like,
Yes.
please, can we just get rid of the middle part?
I know.
Because that's
Let this be like
where
cancer where we can just have some like big surgery and then you're cancer free, you know?
the messy middle is, and having done some, like, therapy, coaching, emotional work, for anybody who's done that work, um, I have a session later that I'm not really looking forward to. Actually, it's funny. But that the benefits on the other side can really be fantastic. And going in is very scary. It can be very dark. And so first of all, it's amazing and wonderful that you are doing this work with families. Um, and that they have, that there are more and more places and people available to families like this, because I imagine when this was happening in your family, did you know anybody else who was experiencing this?
I knew no one. And we eventually figured out that my kid was autistic and the PDA profile. And I went and Googled, like, how do you parent a PDAer? And everybody said, oh, low demand. You got to drop demands. And I was like, okay, great. How do I do that? I Google that. There's nothing. There's not a website. There's no steps. There's no book. There's no teacher. There's no course. There's nothing. There was the PDA Society in England, which they've done so much beautiful work. Like, my goodness, where would we be without those brave researchers 20 years ago in England who had the courage to name something new that they were seeing? And it's still really controversial. Like, even right now, there's so much attention being brought to it, but equal parts like challenge. And I think that's part of the like birthing process is the challenge part coming in. So it was very lonely and scary. And a big part of my pattern seeking brain was figuring out, excuse me, what are what are we learning here? What are the steps? Like, I love sorting things into categories. My favorite thing is like a big old messy ball of yarn, and I'm just like pulling, pulling, pulling until it like lays out neatly in a long thread. And so that's one of the things that kept me going through this really hard process, was seeking out the patterns and noticing the wins that are so unseen. But like when my kid would say, I want to hit you, but didn't hit me, like
Yeah,
huge moment. Or
huge.
when I would deliver him food and he would not look at me, he wouldn't speak to me, there was no connection, I would just slide it in and leave. And I didn't push him because that's not the way. It's safety. It's these continual doses of safety. And that the response is when he's telling me I am now safe enough to reach back. And so then there was one day I deliver his plate of pretzels and Nutella, and he looks up at me and says, "Thanks, Mom." Like he did it every day. And I was like, whoa, you looked at me, you acknowledged my presence, and you said thank you with this like so super open-hearted, like, ah, that was a turning point day. And so I was looking for the signs and looking for the steps. And that's really, so like you said, Low Demand, the book is like part our story because I needed examples. I needed community. I needed anybody who was like, I know what this is and I've been through it, and you're not crazy and you're not a bad parent and you're not alone and you don't have to make this up for yourself. Here you go. And then the here you go is like, here are the 6 steps that we found. Every single demand, whether it was pour milk on your cereal or get in the car to go to therapy or share your toy with your sibling, anything, go to school, every single demand, we ended up, if we were successfully going to release it or shift it, we went through the same steps. And that's what the book is. And it's really short because I wanted to write it to myself when I was freaking out and my brain wasn't functioning properly, because
One of the things
that's
I
what trauma
noticed,
does.
as one of the things I noticed, is a very short book, which is fantastic. Um, there's a rule in there that sort of, there's like an overarching rule, because you came up with new family rules. And I find this really, I love this idea, because I often recommend to families that they do a family meeting, that they create some guidelines. Rules is sometimes a really like weird word for people, because it's like, you can't blah 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 blah. Well, actually I can, because you can't force me to do anything.
Yes.
So how did you, just give me one, just remind us of one of those rules that you had, sort of
Okay.
moving forward into the new world here.
Yeah. Well, so for us, the reason we like the word rules is because they're most like we're playing with the idea that usually rules are restrictive towards kids.
Mhm.
And all of our rules, it's like we're kind of like winking at the word rule when we say it, because all of our rules are around permission
Mhm.
and expansiveness. And typically their own, it's more like they're rules for people coming into our home who want to impose traditional rules on us. We're like, oh, we got some rules. Sure, sure, sure. Our rule is we can eat anything, anytime, any place. So if you come in and you're like, ooh, that yogurt cup is messy, don't take that to your bed. My kid can be like, oh, our family rule is anything, anytime, any place. It's kind of like, boom, we got this. We got a rule for this. And it's that you can trust me. Or we spill the yogurt cup, and that is not as big of a deal as having access to the foods that we need in the places that we need them. And so we know what matters most. And eating is really hard for us as a family. So we're going to drop every single demand that gets in the way of our ability to feed ourselves, because that's not a given for us. And that stuff comes up all the time. Or like just yesterday, we ended up going over to get some food from like a little convenience store around the corner from us. And my kids didn't wear their shoes because some days are no shoe days. And so one of our family rules is my body, my choice. And so they're walking into the convenience store, no shoes. An older person says, "Hey, where are your shoes?" And to my kids, which happens all the time. People love to comment on why we're not wearing, or the fact that my kids aren't wearing shoes. And we've agreed that in that moment, they don't have to say anything. I will step in and I say, "It's a no shoes day." And then the woman's like, well, be careful because there's lots of stuff people drop around here. And I said, I trust my kids. And so that's another, like, that's the sort of flip side of our rule, is the rule is my body, my choice, but I, as the adult, will defend your choice to other adults who want to question it. It's not
Oh,
your job to do that because we are taking power into consideration here, and we do have differentiated roles even though we have shared rules. So that's kind of how we negotiated as a family.
I want to just point out how you did not, this is just for the people listening, because I know you know what you did. You did not explain, my kids are autistic, they have
Mm,
sensory processing differences. We've decided it's a whole lot. No, it's a no shoes day. And I trust my kids. And first of all, that is like super, super brave in and of itself, because there's a huge what if. What if they step on glass? What if they aren't allowed in the store? What if somebody says something? Like, there's so many what ifs
mm.
that I can hear the audience in my head being like, what? She did what?
That's my job in the world, is to make people go, "What? She did what?"
Because it comes from such a solid place. And I know this is years of really intense work that you have done. When you do that, that's the payoff, is like, it's not a thing for me. I don't have to explain anything to you. I might give you the courtesy of an answer, and that's all. I'm fine. I'm not mad at you for saying anything, right? I'm not mad at the world for having responses to my kids, but I'm also not going to engage in some kind of tit for tat, because I'm within my rights and I know that solidly.
Yes.
And that is a journey that parents of, particularly of orchid kids, of neurodivergent kids, whatever, get to. That's a path you get to take if you decide, and it's a lot of work, but the payoff. And I hope people are listening, who are listening, can feel the energy behind this conversation, Amanda, because you come with this very you come with a lot of yellow bubble energy, that is really solid and
Mm,
grounded and open. And I know that's hard won for you. And so
mm,
what a beautiful
yeah.
thing to spread that into the world, rather than more kind of restriction and self-censorship and masking and all of
Mm,
that. I so appreciate the result of what you've been able to do
thank
and
you.
share with us.
Yeah. Yeah, and the what ifs are real. I think a big thing that I would share as you're dropping demands, and you highlighted this really well, that dropping demands in the moment looks like I bring the shoes in the car. I'm like, gotta put on your shoes because the store says we've got to. And they're like, no, I don't want to. I can't go. Da, da, da. And then we have this whole thing between the two of us. Okay, fine. Let's just get in there really fast. And I'm like so nervous, right? Somebody's gonna say something, and I'm trying to let it go, but I'm doing it in the moment when we're in the parking lot and the store is right there, and it's like so stressful. Of course, I'm not going to have yellow bubble energy in that moment. It's not possible for my brain to hold all of those things with like grounded settledness. So a real, and that's why the 6 steps are so important, is it takes you through this journey of discovering what matters most in this moment. Where are your kids right now? Like that really deep attunement and working together collaboratively, which you can even do when your kids are not communicating verbally, which mine wasn't for at least 6 months of our journey. And still, words drop out all the time. So parents often think, well, my kid won't answer any. If I say, why don't you want to wear your shoes in the store? They say nothing, or they yell at me or something. Like that's not the kind of collaboration that we're talking about. And then this kind of like, okay, I trust you, first of all. And more importantly, I trust us, that we can handle whatever comes. We'll learn from it and we'll incorporate it. And so, like, there is one place that I do have to say, hey, this is a shoes place, our public library. There is a law enforcement officer that stands at the door. And if we go in without shoes, he sends us back out. Now, first of all, what an opportunity for teaching about, like, why is this law enforcement? And what exactly is their role? What if we looked different? What's going, like, a lot of social commentary can happen in that moment, right?
Mhm.
And that happened to us. We went in with socks. I defended, I said, because I'm prepared, I will go down on the hill that socks are shoes. I'm like, prove to me the difference between socks and shoes. Um, so, but he was not budging, and I wasn't budging on the, you know, forcing the issue with my kid. And so we left and we talked it through. And we, like, is it worth it to go to the library if we have to wear shoes? And what can we do to make that possible in a way that isn't too threatening for you? And it turned out for us that it wasn't worth it. And so we put the order in online and I picked the books up. Simply because the demand, the threat of that officer enforcing the rule is what makes it inaccessible. It's not that, like, my kids can put shoes on. It's it's the inaccessibility of the space, which is another thing that, like, if the public library ever wanted to have a conversation with me about access, that's something that I would gladly talk about. But I think it's really important to know that dropping a demand proactively doesn't then mean that nothing bad happens. It means that I'm saying, this is what matters to us as a family, and no matter what happens, we will walk through it together. We will learn from it together. We will incorporate it, and I will be okay, and I will help you be okay. And that, I think that's a little different than what people want it to mean.
Yes, it is. I, yeah.
They want it to be like, okay, so I let this go and then everything's okay. I'm like, no.
Well, it probably gets a little messier before it gets a little cleaner. And even then it's still messy. But it's honest and authentic and in integrity with the actual people that you're involved with, who either live in your house or don't live in your house. But
Yeah.
this is something that, again, I do think that as a society, we're generally childish. We think of children as some kind of subhuman generally. And then if, again, a nervous system that is easily triggered is even more kind of challenging for that notion. And so the fact that you were able to break it all the way down is such a number one, it's a service to you, it's a service to your kids, but now a service to your community. And so with that, I mean, you and I would happily sit here all day and talk to you, but in the interest of time, I want you to tell people how they can find you and whether you're how you work with people, please.
Oh, yes. Well, my name online is Low Demand Amanda, and I love saying that. It's so fun. The day that I discovered that little handle, my echolalic brain was like all lit up. Like, I wish that they could have put some probes on my brain to see how many parts of it were lit. So I was like, this is amazing. I had already been teaching and talking about low demand for a long time before I made that switch. And so it was just super cool. So
I felt
that's
the
where you
same
can
way, by
find
the
me.
way. I felt the same
What,
way.
when
I was like, low demand, low demand.
it's so fun, right?
So good.
Yeah, it's so good. So you can find me on Facebook and Instagram are the places that I do the most public teaching.
Mhm.
And then the kind of deep dives that I offer, if someone's like, I need this, I have a master class that's an 8-week course walking through. It's really for parents who are figuring out how to parent their kids. And then I discovered there was this whole other layer, which is kind of what you mentioned before about ourselves, like how our parenting journey is really revealing our own. And so I created a mastermind, which is a 6-month intensive with live retreats, and it's a small group. And we're talking about parenting there, but we're so much more talking about reparenting ourselves. And so that's another kind of container to hold people that want to do the deep, deep work. But above all, I really love creating community for people who feel so alone. So kind of the biggest bucket is that I have an online community space that is really low cost and intentionally so. Like, if you are like, these are my people, and you can't afford anything right now, you're like, you're in debt, things are desperate, just reach out to me. You can get in for free. It's not about barrier to entry. It's about us giving what we have to support the whole community space. And I just love that community. It's called the Connection Collective. And I love your yellow bubble because that's what we're trying to create is a space where we can co-regulate each other, where we feel like we're in the middle of the herd. So we have kind of the safety of all the people around us saying like, me too, me too, me too. And then that's just been a really magical, wonderful experience for me, again, as like a lifelong edge of the herd person to like create my own herd. And it's just as healing for me as for everyone else.
I love that idea. I have never thought about that, to be in the middle versus on the outskirts. And then, yeah, no, I just love that image so much. Yeah,
I got
yeah.
that from Amelia Nagoski, who wrote the book Burnout.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, she shares that idea that, like, that's kind of where that evolutionary instinct to find your people comes from is this, like, animal memory that we hold of like you're more vulnerable when you're on the edges and but there's this kind of like jostling and fighting to get into the middle, and so the kind of alternative is like let's just find our own herd, because that's the masking journey, is like fighting to get into the middle of a herd that's not your herd. It's like go make your own herd and where there's not jostling, like create a protective barrier and then like snuggle up. So that's the mental image that I always hold every time I think about our community space.
Love it.
It's like
Okay.
we're a
And
bunch of sheep all piled up together or something.
right. And that website, give us the website just in case.
Yeah, amandadiekman.com is a great place to find all the stuff. Yeah.
And it's Diekman. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. You can also Google low demand Amanda and it'll be the first thing that pops up.
Perfect. Okay. We will include all of that in the show notes. Amanda, thank you. What a pleasure to talk to you today.
It was so fun. Thank you.